The Middle Ages are often referred to as the Dark Ages for most people. This description is partly true, but it also contains a significant misconception. Because the Middle Ages were indeed dark, yet at the same time they were a laboratory where the foundational reflexes of the modern world were shaped. Questions like what trust is, how power is organized, and how to protect and control money were being asked for the first time in such a stark way. And one of the answers to these questions, perhaps the most effective, was the Knights Templar. Today, if we want to understand banking, we should neither romanticize them nor underestimate them. In the Middle Ages, money was not only an economic tool. Money was also an invitation to violence. Any value that was physically carried was a potential reason for an attack. There were no safe routes, no nation-states, no police, no centralized law. Passing through a lord's territory from one city to another could determine whether you survived. In this environment, carrying gold was almost like saying, "Rob me." This clearly posed a problem. People needed money, but there was no secure way to move it. Financial history begins precisely here, because finance before money is the art of managing risk. The Knights Templar did not see this problem as a military one. For them, it was not something to be solved with more swords. The real issue was organizing trust. Founded in 1119 in Jerusalem, this order quickly evolved beyond a conventional military religious structure. The Templars realized something very early. People saw them not only as warriors, but also as an authority to entrust. This is a critical turning point. Being armed alone is not enough for an institution. It must be entrusted with value. The Templars crossed this threshold. Here it is particularly important to emphasize their direct subordination to the Pope. This detail is often overlooked, but it was actually the most decisive factor in the rules of the game. The Templars were not dependent on local kings. They did not pay taxes. Confiscating their property would trigger a serious political crisis. This transformed them from an ordinary organization into a quasi-sovereign entity. In today's world, a similar situation can only be compared to certain global financial institutions or supranational structures. So, the Templars were not just powerful. Touching them came at a high cost. When people entrusted their money to the Knights Templar, they were essentially exchanging physical risk for institutional trust. The Templars took the gold and issued a document in return. This document was not a simple piece of paper, it was the word of the Templar network. Its value did not come from military power, but from the accounting system behind it. This is a very important distinction. For the first time, abstract trust replaced physical value. The gold remained in place, but the value moved. This was the birth moment of modern finance. The Knights Templars' accounting system was primitive but extremely disciplined. Each Templar house functioned like a branch. Incoming funds were recorded, outgoing funds were recorded, and interbranch differences were regularly reconciled. The system could not tolerate errors. Any gap would collapse the reputation of the entire network. Therefore, for the Templars, keeping records was as serious a responsibility as a religious duty. In financial history, bookkeeping gained a moral dimension at this point. Money was no longer just counted, it became accountable. As the system grew, the Templars' client profile also changed. First came the pilgrims, then the merchants, and eventually the kings. This sequence was not coincidental. Power always follows money. Kings wanted to wage war, but war was not cheap. Maintaining armies, procuring weapons, providing logistics, it all cost money. The Templars supplied this money. Eventually, the picture that emerged was this. An armed religious order had transformed into a financial center lending to European kings. This was a situation politics could not tolerate. The issue of interest was key here. The church had banned interest because charging interest meant making money work, which was seen as defying God. But real life disregards such moral prohibitions. The Templars understood this very well. They did not openly charge interest, but they did not operate the system without profit. Service fees, custody charges, exchange differences, all contributed to capital growth. At this point, it must be said clearly, the Templars were morally hypocritical. But in financial history, this hypocrisy is the rule, not the exception. As power increased, conflict became inevitable. King Philip IV of France's problem with the Templars was not religious, nor was it moral. The problem was purely financial. The kingdom was in debt, and the structure it owed money to was more disciplined than its own army, richer than its treasury. This was unacceptable. The operation carried out in 1307 is one of the first major financial liquidations in history. The accusations were a pretext. The confiscations were real. At this point, the Templars painfully learned financial power cannot survive long without political sovereignty. The rise of the Knights Templar was not only a financial revolution, it was also a power game where politics, faith, and violence were intertwined. They became more than an armed order. They were an institution that disciplined money, meticulously monitored the system, and extended its network throughout Europe. Every new Templar house was not only a garrison but also a financial center. A pilgrim in Paris could deposit money and withdraw it from another Templar house in Jerusalem or Acre. This system was not only secure, it operated in a timely and recorded manner. Establishing such a structure in the Middle Ages was a first in human history and demonstrated the basic logic of modern finance. Money is not just a physical value, it relies on systems and trust. However, as power increased, conflicts also became inevitable. The Templars' rapid and powerful growth in Europe directly conflicted with the interests of local kings and governments. The arrests, accusations, and confiscations of 1307 were a modern financial purge. Philip's aim was clear: erase the debt, break the rival power, and consolidate sovereignty. The accusations were a pretext. The confiscations were real. The Templars learned bitterly that power is limited not only by records and trust, but also by political relations. But ideas do not die. When the Templars disappeared, the logic of the system continued in other hands. The Medici family in Florence inherited the trust, record-keeping, and transfer systems from the Templars, refining them into a more sophisticated and civil form. Modern banking continued what the Templars had begun, but now in greater harmony with the state, more invisible, more sophisticated. The logic did not change. Trust, networks, and discipline still form the essence of banking. International banking, digital transfer systems, and even cryptocurrencies today are direct heirs of the logic introduced by the Templars. Money is not just a means of storing value, it requires trust, discipline, and network management. The Templars demonstrated that behind money lies not just gold, but trust and a system. Their legacy forms the cornerstone of today's financial world. The bank cards in our wallets, the transfers we make, and crypto transactions are, in a sense, the digital reflection of a sealed Templar document written in the Middle Ages. Finally, it must be said clearly, the Knights Templar were neither innocent nor holy, but history has left them as a lesson for anyone wanting to understand the true nature of finance. Money alone is not power. Money becomes real power when properly organized, accounted for and supported by trust. The Templars demonstrated this. Their mistakes and tragedy remind us sharply that finance can never be separated from politics. The complexity of modern banking, crypto systems, and international finance is built upon this fundamental lesson.